In this video you are gonna follow me while I take these photos and around 150 more as I take a very long walk around Stockholm, some parts of the old town and later Djurgården, which is a big island central in the city. It's kind of like Stockholm's Central Park. And today it was very foggy, or actually today is this Monday. Now it's Thursday when I'm recording the voiceover. I had no plans at all actually on this day to go out and do photography, but when I went out to leave my kids at school I noticed that there was a very thick fog, and I also saw in the weather report that the fog was going to last at least a couple of hours. And that's quite unusual. There aren't that many days a year in this town where we have this kind of fog, and I always love photographing in the fog. I think this really is photography on easy mode because I love the low contrast look, the mysterious look you get, and also how the photos become cleaner because you have more negative space. This is something I keep repeating over and over again in all my videos, the importance of having plenty of negative space in a photo to make it aesthetically pleasing. As is often the case when I do a photo walk in town like this, I don't really have a plan, and I like keeping it this way. I think part of making a photo walk enjoyable is to just be spontaneous. Wherever I feel like walking, wherever I feel like there could be good photo opportunities, I go. And that is always decided in the moment. And when I arrived here in the old town, I felt like maybe there will be some interesting photo opportunities in the old town. So I decided to move closer up towards the Royal Castle just to see if we would get any interesting silhouettes in the fog. Maybe the statue up there could be something. But the whole photo walk is just completely unplanned and spontaneous. When I began doing street photography a few months ago, the old town was one of my favorite spots to walk around. But what I have come to realize over time is, while the old town is a very beautiful place to walk around, it's quite empty of people, at least at the times when I have time to walk around there. There are quite a lot of people around 8 up until 9 when people are on their way to work. But then they just stay inside and work, and it's pretty empty, and it's not that great if you want to photograph people. I also discovered here that it is extremely slippery. It's this, we call it dark ice in Swedish, or black ice. It's invisible thin coat of ice on the ground, and it can be quite deceptive. If you haven't realized by now, this will be a pretty long video, so please go grab your favorite beverage if you haven't already, and we will just have a cozy moment, talk about photography, talk about my experiences during this photo walk, but also about other things. For example, I was just thinking about gear and my relationship to it. I haven't changed gear a lot the last year, but sure, I've bought a couple of new cameras, especially as I've started with street photography. I saw the need for some changes. I love using the Sony full frame cameras, and at first I bought the Sony a7C because it is a very compact full frame camera. And you saw me using it in a couple of videos a few months ago, but there were a couple of things I didn't like about it. For one, the viewfinder is pretty low resolution, so when I review photos I've taken, it's a bit hard to see exactly what I got because of the big pixels in the viewfinder. And also the shutter is pretty loud, and yeah, I just like being discreet. So when I purchased the Sony A9 Mark II used, the camera that I'm using in this video and in the last few videos, I really loved it at first sight. My first photo walk with it, I was like, wow, this is exactly the camera I want. The viewfinder is much higher resolution, so I can easily review photos I've taken immediately and see exactly what I got and if it was good or not. The camera feels very quick, and also, of course, it has an electronic shutter with fast readout times, so I can be very quiet and discreet with it. And also, of course, it has a very high burst rate if I want to capture quick moments. So I really love this camera, and yes, it is a bit heavier and a bit bulkier than the A7C, but I have found myself using it all the time despite that. And I've also come to discover that for me, looking through the viewfinder really elevates photography. It makes it so much more fun, interesting and enjoyable because I can immediately see exactly what I will get. Sometimes I have to use the Ricoh GR3X because maybe I don't have the ability to carry around a bigger camera for whatever reason. But then I always feel a bit limited by not having an electronic viewfinder. By this time in the photo walk, I came to realize that the old town is pretty empty and boring, not much going on there, and the mist doesn't come out as well when you have narrow streets and a lot of houses. So I thought to myself, where can I get more of the fog and the mist? And that is of course out at sea and close to sea. So I decided to hop on the ferry that goes out to Djurgården, this big beautiful island, because I figured that I will get more of the fog and I will get the beautiful forests and trees and parks and everything that you can find out on Djurgården, maybe even some animals. After going through the 750 photos that I took on this photo walk, and after picking around 150 of them to have in this video, and after editing all of these 150 photos, I realized something. While I didn't do like heavy edits on any of the photos, I still had to do an edit of each photo, maybe increase the contrast, maybe adjust the shadows, maybe adjust the white balance. And something I realized then when I placed the photos in this video is that the video footage itself here is a bit bluish in tint, as you can see, but I think it's pretty close to how it looked. But if you study the photos, like this one, you can see that it is much more yellow in tone. And what bothers me a lot is that I actually prefer the more bluish look. But now I don't have the energy to go through all these 150 photos again and adjust the edits to be more blue. Yeah, they'll just have to be what they are. I still think many of the photos look beautiful, but when you photograph fog and mist, I personally think that the more bluish look is more beautiful than the more yellowish look. Not sure why I edited them in a more yellow tone. Maybe that is what was closer to what the camera captured. Maybe I just found it beautiful at the time, but when contrasted against the video footage, yeah, I think I prefer the look of the video footage. What do you think? Here we have an edit that is a bit more to the blue side, and it's beautiful, right? Really looks good. And I'm so happy that I chose to take the ferry out to Djurgården, because yeah, if you are photographing fog, close to sea is really where you should be at. Then you also have the large distances, which will make the fog look thicker than it is. Here I also encountered a couple of swans. Always a good subject in any situation. And especially with the clean, beautiful, foggy background. I really love this shot. Since this is a really long video and I have a lot of time to talk, I figured I would bring up a couple of things that maybe aren't directly related to the photo walk, but still very much relevant for me and for most other photographers. One such thing is that Adobe, the makers of Lightroom and Photoshop, have recently increased their photography plan by a lot. In Sweden, where I live, it was increased in price with 70%. So I used to pay around $10, and now it will be like $17 or $18 a month. And don't get me wrong, it still probably is worth it for me, but it really is bordering on too expensive, considering the amount of money I would pay over, say, a 5-year period. There are a lot of alternatives out there. I recently asked everyone that follows me on Instagram if they have any suggestions, and I got a lot of suggestions. And for just image editing, whether it's raw files, photography, or it's making thumbnails on YouTube, I think there are certainly good alternatives. But the big thing that I use Lightroom Classic for a lot, that I haven't really found a good alternative for, is catalog management. I really love the fact that in Lightroom I have a huge catalog of tens of thousands of photos, and I can easily find any photo along with the edits for that photo that I've ever taken. And I don't really know of any other software where you have that managed in as a good way, where you have all the raw files, all the edits, and an easy way to look for photos. I think that is the thing that I would miss the most. On the other hand, I haven't really used any of the alternatives yet. I haven't used Darktable or Capture One or O1, whatever all of them are called. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure if I will have the patience and take the time to actually try all those competitors. The sad truth is that I will probably just keep paying Adobe until it becomes outrageously expensive. Maybe if they would charge $40 or $50 a month for just Lightroom and Photoshop, maybe then I would seriously look into other options. Now I just feel like I'm not super happy about the price increase, but on the other hand, I don't really know of any great alternatives. And then I haven't even considered the considerable cost of switching, of learning a new tool, of migrating all my data in a safe way, of re-indexing and re-cataloging all my photos. That's just so much work, probably a couple of days of work, and it really has to be worth it if I'm gonna put in that time. And the sad truth is that Adobe knows about this. They know how much work it is to switch and how much creatures of habit we all are, and that is why they know that they can increase the price with 70% and still keep almost every customer. But if there would be a competitor which is at least as good as Adobe and that has a cheaper price or maybe a one-time cost payment, then maybe Adobe would be in trouble. I actually used more Adobe software when I started with YouTube. I used to edit all my YouTube videos in Adobe's video editor, Premiere. And the reason why I used Premiere was that I used Adobe tools for other things like Lightroom and Photoshop, and also Premiere was the tool that most of the YouTubers I followed were using. So it was pretty much the only tool I knew about, and I knew that if my favorite YouTubers were using that tool and they made great videos, then I can't go wrong with it. But after making a couple of hundred videos in Premiere, I started really hating it because there is so much boilerplate work in that tool. You have to do so many seemingly unneeded actions to create each video, so it was so much extra work that wasn't actually the video creation itself. And I think my eye-opener was when I tried another video editing tool for iPad called LumaFusion, a very simple tool, and I realized that it is possible to make a video editor that is so much simpler than Premiere and so much faster to work in. And then I discovered that there is actually a LumaFusion for Mac OS, and that is Final Cut Pro, Apple's own video editor. I tried it for a little while, and it took some getting used to. It took a couple of weeks of active learning to unlearn everything I've been doing in Premiere and to start working in Final Cut Pro, but it was the best software switch I've ever done, because every time now I'm making a video, it is so much faster, so much easier for me to make that video. I save so much time and frustration, and I can focus all my efforts on the video itself and not on work around the video. It felt quite a lot like when I switched from PC to Mac for work. I mean, I don't want to make this political, but when I was using PC earlier, I felt like 10 to 20% of my time working was always spent on trying to fix problems with the computer itself or with the software in the computer. When I switched to Mac, I spent 99% of my time doing my work. I never had to spend time trying to fix problems with the computer, and that is worth a lot. Even if the computer is much more expensive, I save so much time and energy that it easily becomes worth it. Do you see what's coming there on the left? It's a swan, and as you can see, it is passing through a very narrow canal in the ice. Really beautiful scene, and I don't think I've ever seen this before, that they have these small passages that I have broken up where they can swim around. Sure looks cold. I'm super happy with these photos. I love the contrast of the dark in the foreground and the soft fog in the background, and as always the beautiful shapes of a swan. The only problem really with the fog on this day was that I took so many photos that I considered worth keeping, around 150 or so, of which maybe 30 I deemed that I really liked. The problem with that is that I've spent so much time editing the photos, looking through the photos, and also a lot of time editing this video. It was quite a bit of footage. Normally I make a video from start to end in 2 days, and now I'm on the 4th day, and I hope that I will finish this video today because I'm adding the voiceover as like one last thing. On any other photo walk of around 2 hours as this one was, I would get maybe 5 or maybe 10 photos that I would deem good enough to keep or to post on social media. So yeah, the fog really makes a huge difference for me. Then again, maybe part of it is because the fog is quite unusual here. We have a few days of fog in the spring, or like this time of the year, and usually a few days of fog in the autumn. And while there are many mornings with fog, that fog usually goes away at sunrise. But it's very unusual that the fog stays around the whole day like today. When it comes to camera settings, I don't have that much new to tell you. I still use the settings I talked about in my previous video about my street photography camera settings. I have found these to work very well for all kinds of different photography. To summarize it simply, I have my camera in aperture priority mode, the A on the top wheel of the camera, which means that the main priority is what aperture I'm shooting at, and for actually most of this video I had the aperture wide open at 1.8, but for many of the shots I had a smaller aperture like f8 to get more depth of field. But anyway, I think it's nice to have the aperture as the main deciding factor of your settings, because usually the depth of field is what you're most interested in adjusting. Then I have the ISO at auto ISO, so I set limits of a bottom of 100, of course, and then an upper end of around 2500 in ISO, so I don't get too much noise. And then I have a shutter speed that should preferably be at least 1/250th of a second. But if the ISO is maxed out at 2500, the shutter speed will have to give in and be lowered, which isn't really a big problem when you're doing this kind of photography. You may know the rule of thumb that when you're shooting something that is still, a picture like this, then as long as you have a shutter speed of at least your focal length, you are usually fine. And my focal length on this camera is 45mm, so if I shoot at 1/50th of a second, I get sharp photos as long as the subject is still and as long as I'm holding the camera fairly still. And that rule of using at least the focal length in shutter speed doesn't even take into consideration the fact that most modern cameras have in-body image stabilization and often lens stabilization, which actually makes it possible to take sharp photos down to maybe 1/10th of a second in many cases. Anyway, none of that is too relevant here because we are in daylight and I will be able to get a really nice photo at a low ISO with a fairly high shutter speed anyway. an interesting thing that happened recently for me was that a company that makes wallpapers, photography wallpapers to be more precise, asked if they could use some of my photos as subjects for wallpapers that people could order to have in their homes. And I was like, sure, let's try it. Why not? I don't have much to lose by collecting a few photos and sending them over and trying that. I did not expect at all to earn any money whatsoever from this, because as we all know, stock photography and other ways of selling your photos to earn money is pretty much dead these days. So I had no expectations at all. Then I got my first report from them the other day, and I had actually made a few sales and earned $250 in a couple of months, which I was really surprised by and really happy with. And I had uploaded all sorts of different photos, macro photos, landscape photos, street photos to them just to see what people would order to have cover their walls at home. And the kinds of photos that sold the best was actually the kinds of photos that I'm taking in this video. Misty forests, foggy landscapes, and I get that. I mean, these kinds of photos look very pleasing and they are calming to some extent, and I really like them personally. So I will send in quite a few of the photos that I'm showing in this video to be sold as wallpapers, and we'll see if I can earn even more next time. And the wallpaper thing is great for me, because I am looking to find more sources of income this year that is not sponsored videos. I want my sources of income to be almost 100% passive, things that make me earn money by just continuing to do what I like doing the most, which is to make these videos. If I can focus most or pretty much all of my time on making videos and then having the income as a consequence of that, then I would be happy. And another thing that I'm doing is that I've began writing this book about macro photography. I try to write a few hours every week. Every time I have some time left over that I'm not sure what to do with, I try to spend that writing. It is hard work though. I find it much easier to just make these photography videos. Writing is hard work, but what makes it easier for me to write this macro photography book than previous books I've written is that I know the subject very, very well. I have taught every lesson that I teach in this book through YouTube videos, through 350 YouTube videos about macro photography, so it's not hard for me to reach for the facts. I can just sit down and just type for half an hour straight without much of a problem, because I have practiced for years teaching these things and putting it in a way that people can understand and so on. It's still hard work though. You need to include good illustrations, good pictures, you need to phrase the language in a good way, you have to divide the content in a good structure and so on. And these days I'm not too used to working with text like that, so yeah, what I'm trying to say here is that I have a feeling that it could be a few months before this book is done. I don't want it to be like a Bible, like a super thick book of 1,000 pages. I want it to be accessible, but I still want to include everything that is worth knowing about macro photography, so that if you invest the time in actually reading it, you will know everything I know, everything that is of importance that I know. That is the goal with this book. I want to be able to promise that you will learn everything I know about macro photography. And the book will, as a consequence of that, probably be around 150 pages or so, maybe even 200 pages, including photos and illustrations. I think that is probably what's needed to teach all the most important things that I know about macro photography. And then it will be very, very interesting to see how much this book sells, and if it continues to sell after the initial release. And if it becomes a success for me, if I earn a significant amount of money each month on this book, significant for me is like a couple $1,000 or $1,000 a month, then that I would view as a big success. If that happens, I will for sure make more books. Maybe one about landscape, maybe one about street photography, and so on and so on. Also, I think that when making these books as digital products, I don't think I will ever view them as done. I think I will probably just continue adding small things to them as I learn new things myself and as I revise things I know. I want to be able to just go in there and continuously adding and improving things to the books, just to have them as like a permanent record of my knowledge at the moment. Here, by the way, you can see the difference between my more bluish edit that more corresponds to the video and the more yellowish edit that I did for most of the photos. I just wanted to try this with one photo to see the difference, and I think both of them look really good. And in some photos maybe they look better blue, in some photos maybe they look better in a more yellowish, more natural tone, but I think it depends a bit on the photo. For this photo walk I am using the Samyang 45mm prime lens f1.8. I really love this lens. It's a great all-round lens that you can use for street photography, landscape, portraits, anything. And as with most Samyang lenses, it is very good value for money. Good optics, cheap price, small and lightweight. Super lightweight actually, it weighs almost nothing. I love this lens. And the reason I wanted to use it today is because it's so all round, and it's great if you want to photograph some trees and some landscapes, but also street. Also, in the last POV video I made, I used the 75mm, and what I've realized is that when I film my videos with this super wide angle action cam, when I'm using a long lens like 75mm, it's actually kind of hard to see exactly what I'm taking a photo of, because if the action camera has a focal length of like 12mm, like super duper wide, and the lens is 75mm, like what I'm photographing will be an extremely small part of what you're seeing in the video footage. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's good if the focal length of the lens that I'm using is closer to the action camera focal length, because then it's easier for you to see how I'm taking the photo, because you can see the photo in the footage before I'm taking it if you follow what I mean. This area here in the middle of Djurgården, I think it's called Rosendal, and here we had some really beautiful trees. I love when they have these layers of trees with the fog in between. So beautiful. And so perfect for the kind of style I'm after. And now coming up in a couple of seconds, I'm taking one of my favorite photos from this photo walk. I see the different layers here, and I see these two trees that can act like a framing for a photograph. And they reached out tall, so I'm doing a tall portrait mode photo here. And as you can see, I'm waiting for that person who is walking there to walk in the right place to be a part of the photo. And I love this. If you look really closely, you can see that person, and it adds something to the photo. It becomes more interesting when you spot the person in the frame. It's almost like magic. Whenever you add people, however small they are in the frame, it makes the frame feel more alive. So how do I decide where to go on a photo walk? Well, to answer it in the shortest way possible, it's just gut feeling. I just do what feels right. But if I were to break that down a little bit, I think one of the things I'm obviously thinking about is where can I get good photos. If I see that the light is beautiful in some place particular, I would just go in that direction. If I see something interesting happening somewhere, I just go in that direction. But it's not only that. Part of it is also where I am curious to go. For example, the reason I chose to go to this part of the island is that it was quite a few years since I was here the last time. So I was just curious, how does it look today? Do I remember it correctly? Has it maybe changed? And I think it's really important to also answer to that side of you, the curiosity, because that will make the walk more enjoyable. If you're driven by curiosity to see how a certain place looks, that will also, I think, in some sense make you more creative. I have found that if I just do the same walk over and over again, I get very, very bored, and that kills all creativity, all inspiration, and all urge to do something creative. I think that is the reason I got fed up with macro photography. I just did too much of the same thing over and over again. I had too little variation. So I think variation and breaking patterns and going places where you usually don't go is super important, and you should never forget to do that if you're doing something creative. Here I wanted to back off a little bit to get a better framing of this tree. And I think the blast photo was also good, but this one is good in a different way. And again, the reason I'm walking out into this field is because I spotted something. I spotted those trees back there. They look really good. And we have a lot of beautiful trees in Stockholm, and especially on Djurgården, but usually they are not well isolated. Usually there are too many things in the foreground or in the background that makes it impossible to take an isolated photo of just a tree and nothing else. And if you are able to get such a photo, it becomes incredible, it becomes beautiful, but it's pretty rare that a tree stands by itself like this. And it's also even more rare that you find a tree standing by itself with mist in the background. And then you can get beautiful photos like these ones. I'm really happy with these photos. So that was what I was drawn to when I walked into this field. And usually when you are drawn to something that you see in the distance, you will find even more of it when you get there. And that is the case both with insects but also with trees and landscapes of different sorts. So yeah, I think it's really good to just follow your gut feeling. You will find beautiful things and you never know where you will end up. When I began this day, I didn't even know that I was going to do a long photo walk. I had completely other plans. I was going to work on other things, but the weather drew me into the town. And when I got into town, I had no idea that I would photograph trees out on Djurgården. I thought I was going to do a long street photography session in the fog. That was my vision back then. But thanks to following my gut feeling, I got all this interesting landscape and tree photos in the fog, which I had no idea I was going to get. And it was thanks to following my gut feeling. So why am I doing this voiceover on this long video? Well, most of it is to make it a bit more interesting, because I did a couple of quiet POV photo walk videos earlier, but when I made them I also felt myself like they are a little bit too boring. What can I do to make them slightly more interesting? And one thing is of course to add commentary like I'm doing now. Also, I like talking for a bit longer sometimes, even though I don't always feel like I have that much to say. It's nice to once in a while have more like a podcast conversation almost. And I decided that this could be the video for that. Also, I want to talk a little bit about the whole YouTube game. It's a really hard balance to strike to be a full-time YouTuber and to do videos you want to make while still getting views. Because if I would make 100% exactly the videos I want to make, then I would probably get maybe half as many views per video as I get now. I always have to consider what kind of videos work on YouTube, sadly. For example, for this video, I did some research. I was planning to maybe call it something like fog photography, la la la. And then I discovered that there pretty much aren't any successful YouTube videos at all about fog photography. For whatever reason, people are not really that interested in that as a topic. It doesn't generate high click-through rates. And sure, the most relevant title for this video would probably be POV fog photography, but I'm probably not going to give it that title, because then I know that it will not be watched by a lot of people except my most loyal followers. So it's always a hassle that I always need to think really hard about how I package the video to make a video concept that I want to make, but that still has a packaging. And then when I say packaging, I mean title and thumbnail and video idea. A packaging that most people would want to watch, that give a good click-through rate. Because let's face it, I want to have as many views as possible on my videos. It's more fun if more people watch them. If I spend 4 days on making a video. I want as many people as possible to watch it. I feel sad if I spend 4 days on a video and only a couple hundred people watch it. And also, the other part of it is, of course, that I make more money if I have more views. So for that reason as well, I want to be able to pay my bills. Then I want as many views as possible. And then I have to realize I need to be playing the YouTube game to some extent. So for example, when I made the video about slow shutter speed in street photography, I made a couple of these videos and they have performed well and are still performing well. The reason for that is probably mostly that is a kind of video that is in demand. I did research beforehand and I saw several really successful videos on that topic, so I knew that it was going to work. If I didn't know that it was going to work, maybe I hadn't even done the videos. And yeah, to some extent it is a bit sad that I need to consider things like this. It would be such a wonderful world if I could just make videos about whatever I felt like making videos about and still get many views. But that is not, unfortunately, how reality works. Unless you are some kind of very, very interesting, charismatic personality, then it might work for you. But even for the most successful photography YouTubers, maybe in particular the most successful photography YouTubers, they really need to consider what kind of videos are in demand. Most of the time, if you want to be sure to get many views on a YouTube video about photography, you should be talking about gear. You should be talking about I switched to Leica, or I switched to Sony, or the reason I want to use this camera or that lens. And as anyone who has been in photography for a while knows, gear is not that important. It's almost like a cliche these days to say that, but it's true, right? But problem is though that most people who are watching photography videos on YouTube are beginners, and beginners think that gear is the most important thing, or they are on YouTube to research gear because they are beginners and they want to buy a camera. Yeah, that's just how reality looks, and I'm not complaining about it. I mean, YouTube is still a really good platform, I think, to publish work. I mean, you can even make a living pretty easily doing it, which is a lot harder on many other platforms. So I'm not complaining, I'm just trying to be transparent about some decisions that go into which videos people make and which videos people do not make. The utopia would, as I said, be that you could just make videos and not worry about thumbnails or titles or any of that. Maybe in the future YouTube could be more like TikTok, where you just make the video and then the platform itself will serve it to the right people. Here, by the way, is a map of this island that I've been walking around on now for most of the video. That is where we are now. And the ferry that I took in the beginning, it came to that point, and then I walked, as I'm pointing here, over Rosendal. No, not that way. That way, I think. Through those trees and down here. And now I will continue walking westward along the coastline. Not sure if we could call it coastline when it's a small island, but yeah, you probably understand what I mean. it's important to sometimes look back behind you. I did that here and I got this shot. I think it's really cool. You have this mysterious shadow at the horizon. Really love that photo. I sometimes reflect on what is it that makes me love photography? What is it that drew me into it? And what is it that keeps me doing it and enjoying it after, I think I'm doing it now for 8 years, almost daily. And to summarize it as simply as possible, I think I love the small hit of dopamine that I get whenever I catch a frame that I find aesthetically pleasing, that I find beautiful. And I love the challenge of going out in everyday regular conditions. Yeah, maybe fog isn't a regular everyday condition, but I certainly go out even on days that are very regular and try to capture small glimpses of beauty that could be hard to find. Try to make beautiful photos even of very boring situations and boring places. I think the small joy of catching a photo like that is what keeps me in photography. I'm not sure if it is the same for you. By the way, this photo I took last Monday or this Monday, and someone messaged me on Instagram and said that the big tree that you can see on the photo that I'm about to take here in a couple of seconds actually was cut down the day after. The day after I took this photo. The tree on the left here does not exist any longer. So by sheer coincidence I managed to get one of my favorite photos from this photo walk, and probably maybe I took the last photo ever of this tree on the left here that no longer exists. And by the way, the tree was apparently cut down because it had some kind of disease, so it was dangerous to keep it around, so it was not for any nefarious reason that they cut it down. And I'm probably gonna get 1 or 2 questions about how I have edited all these 150 photos that you can see in this video. And the answer is that I'm not spending too much time on each photo. I never do that, even if I don't have as many photos to go through. I prefer to try to catch photos that are good straight off the camera and then make smaller edits. What I mostly change is the contrast. Sometimes the contrast is very low when you have photos taken in fog, so then I try to increase the whites and sometimes even the shadows to make the photo pop a bit more, to make the sky, for example, be brighter than it looked in the photo. So basically just adjusting the exposure a bit. And then one thing I often do is play around with the white balance to get the right amount of bluish or yellowish tint in the photo to make it as beautiful as possible, or as true to what it looked like in reality as possible, depending on what I'm going after. And that's basically it. Yeah, I also work a bit with the cropping. As you can see, I have many different aspect ratios on my photos in this video, and I usually just try to give the photo the crop that lends itself best to the photo, that makes the photo look as aesthetically pleasing, as beautiful as possible. And that often means cutting out things that are distracting. I very rarely use any clone stamp or any AI tools to remove stuff, only in certain cases. I think in a couple of photos in this video I did that when it was something very distracting, like an orange pole at the roadside in an otherwise very natural looking landscape. Then I might clone stamp that out, but otherwise I don't do that, mostly because I don't have the time or the patience, but also because I like the fact that you should be able to take photos that look good, that reflect reality. That's part of the challenge and part of the fun with photography. Also, when it comes to cropping photos, I think one really good thing that you should consider, something really important that I have learned, is that whenever you have shapes in your photo that go in a certain direction, what I mean is, for example, if you're photographing a tree that goes from the ground and up, then most of the time that photo will look better if it is in portrait mode, if it is a tall photo, because when you orient the photo itself along the main lines in the photo, for whatever reason it just looks more pleasing. If you have a photo, for example, of this path going upwards and the trees going upwards, it just looks better in portrait mode than in wide mode. It looks better when the lines in the photo follow the orientation of the whole photo. That is something I keep as a rule of thumb. I sometimes break it, of course, but in most cases, when I'm wondering whether to take a photo in portrait mode or in landscape mode, I just try to follow the main lines in the photo. We are slowly but steadily approaching the end of this video. And if you are still around watching and listening, thank you so much. This is a very unusual type of video for me to do. I seldomly make long videos like this one, mostly because it's a lot of work, and also mostly because of most of my photo walks do not contain enough interesting content to warrant a long video like this. Usually I just get like a few good photos, but On this walk I really felt like I got quite a few photos I was happy with, and I really wanted to just show you them all and to have a longer conversation like this. I hope you enjoyed this style of video, and I certainly hope that it gets some views because in most cases when you put more work than regular into a video like this to make it super long, it actually doesn't perform that well.